Hello, everyone. Welcome to Introduction to Web Development. Super excited to show you all the basics of HTML, CSS, and also just an overview of web development in general. So let me know if you can see my screen, and then we can get started. Hello. I love seeing all the people in the chat. So excited to get into web development today. Okay, awesome. My screen sharing is good. Sorry for the delay. My slides got a little bit messed up before we got started, but all is good now. So this week for Global Hack Week in September, we're going to be talking about Introduction to Web Development, which is a little bit different than the other Web3 streams we've been having this week. Here's a little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing in this stream. First, we'll have a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll talk about the evolution of web development. And then we'll get into a little bit more about web development stacks and what kind of comprises a website. And then lastly, we'll kind of talk about a little bit of front-end basics before we dive into a live code demo where I'll walk through building a website with y'all. And you can ask questions as we go along. And you should have a working web page by the end of this workshop. And then finally, before we part ways, I'll show you some resources to continue learning about web development and my personal recommendations. So my name's Gabriella. I'm a coach here at Major League Hacking, and I've been designing websites in some capacity for the past 9 years. 9 years might be a little bit generous, but when I was a lot younger, I would mess with the CSS on different websites to change the design. In particular, I liked messing around with blog themes, whether it be on WordPress, Tumblr, or like Blogger through Google, if you remember that. That's kind of like where I learned the basics of CSS and kind of design as a kid. And then later when I was introduced to kind of web development and coding as a concept is when I started actually building websites from scratch and working with different frameworks. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I have them on a second screen, but I'll be checking them periodically. Oh, someone likes the slides. Thank you so much. I would take credit for them, but I can't. They're like a Canva template. I really like them. So kind of moving on to what web development includes and what web development is. So essentially, the internet is built on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now that web development has kind of expanded, there's a lot of frameworks built on these different things and a lot of programs using different coding languages where websites are able to be deployed through this. but all the time they're utilizing these different languages and frameworks to display the content in some capacity. A lot of websites are built with just these three. JavaScript can do a lot on its own, especially with Ajax and jQuery. But there are other frameworks like React, Angular, Svelte is a new one, and there's a bunch more that we'll get into later, where you can learn to do even cooler things and more interactive things. So a little bit more about what web development actually includes, because web development encompasses a ton of stuff, because web development is so core to the internet as a whole. Excuse me. So the first thing is kind of designing user interfaces. So the different buttons you see on websites, the icons you see on your browser, the images you see on websites, and kind of the overall experience you have when interacting with a website is all done by UI, UX designers. There's a whole research process like related to that, and that's encompassed in web development. There's also the aspect of actually coding interactive web pages, debugging that, figuring out how to make particular features, and bringing those designs of UI, UX designers to life. Web development also includes conducting user and unit tests. And this is essentially both the tests that make sure that it's accessible and usable for people to kind of complete their functions. So making sure that not only can the average person go through and like fill out a form, but if you're colorblind, can you fill out this form? If you need different accessibility measures like a screen reader or different embedded tools in the website, does it support that? And then also conducting unit tests. And this is just to make sure that different use cases and input, like the website can handle that essentially. And also making sure that vulnerabilities can't be exploited. That's all included in web development. Another part of web development is managing databases, because there's such a massive amount of data on the web. So you need to make sure that everything's managed properly and efficiently. So you're both collecting the data that you need to and also utilizing it in an efficient way on the website so that it doesn't take forever to load and things don't break mid-process. Someone asked if they're going to talk about the process, if I'm going to be talking about the process from start to finish, UI, UX, research, branding, languages. I'll be touching a little bit on the process, but I won't be going too in depth because we do have a live coding demo at the end, which will take a good amount of our time, but I'll be touching on all of that. And if you have specific questions about the different parts of the process, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. Okay. So kind of we're going to talk about the different eras of the internet and web development as a whole, because there's different technologies and kind of ideas and philosophies to different eras of the internet. As I've noticed, and as like a lot of you have probably noticed as well, the internet changes at a very like rapid pace, both through the technology that is used to build it, but also just like the overall philosophy and like ways we use it. So this has changed starting in the 1980s to modern day. And there's a lot of different eras in the internet. So the first one is called the early days. And this is when HTML kind of was first emerging. Someone named Tim Berners-Lee is the one who first introduced HTML. And if you didn't know, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. This was in the late 80s. And this is allowed for static web pages with hyperlinks and a few like basic pieces of text to kind of be put up on the web. This was pretty cool at the time, but as you can tell, the internet has gone a long way since then. I'm doing all of this streaming and presenting on the internet using websites that were all built with this like the evolution of this technology. And kind of going along with that, in the 1990s, the same person, Tim, created the first web browser, which was called the World Wide Web Browser. I had never heard of this before making this presentation, but also I wasn't around during the 90s, so that probably play a role in that. And this made the web more accessible to a wider audience because there was less kind of like technical setup, and you were able to access the internet a lot easier with this like new web browser. Kind of moving into the next era of the internet in web development as a whole is the browser wars. And this is when kind of browsers were fighting with one another to take over the market share, as well as just like usage overall, because this would become such a big part of like how the internet was used and how technology was used in general. This took place during the 1990s to the early 2000s. And this is when Netscape came around. Netscape was a big thing for a while, but is no longer widely used. The full name is called Netscape Navigator, and it was the first widely used web browser in the 1990s, and it kind of drove the need for more dynamic content, because in the past it was very static web pages, just like HTML, CSS. You would see like some text, some hyperlinks, and maybe a picture or something, but not much outside of that. And because of that need for more dynamic content, this is when JavaScript was invented by someone named Brendan in 1995. And this is allowing client-side scripting and interactivity in web pages. So allowing for the users to kind of input information, for forms to be submitted, and for more, I guess, animations on web pages that weren't able to be done solely with CSS. Okay, and then moving on to the next era, this is coined Web 2, kind of as a precursor to Web 3. This is still kind of going on, but isn't what we would call modern day, because there have been a few evolvements since then. So the first thing was AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So kind of a mouthful, which is why they abbreviate a lot of these things. But this kind of emerged, and this allowed for more of a seamless data exchange between the client side and the server side without the page reloading, which allowed for a lot more web pages to run more quickly. I know that when there's a lot of data on web pages that I'm using, and it's not properly managed, or but the data is not properly managed and it's not properly configured, it takes like a long time to load. And if it's not absolutely necessary, sometimes I'll get frustrated and use a different service or try to figure out the problem somewhere else, because it can take so long, and also affects like the other stuff I'm running on my computer if it's using up too much storage in that moment. Here in the early 2000s, we also saw that CSS continued to evolve. What CSS stands for, if you didn't know, was cascading style sheets. And this is when they became like more advanced, more sophisticated, and this allowed for better web page layout. So we evolved from the kind of clunky old web pages to more aesthetically appealing web pages. Design became more integral to the average web page, and kind of user experience and interface design started to emerge when CSS got better. And then after the early 2000s, when CSS began to evolve, a few years later in the mid 2000s, we saw the rise of content management services as well as frameworks for websites, which really allowed for a boom of new websites for people who weren't technical to make their own websites through the help of things like WordPress. Drupal is another one. There's Wix. There's like a lot of different content management systems now. And this helped for non-technical people, or people who were a little bit technical but didn't really know where to start with building something from scratch, to kind of create a website, manage their content. And this reduced the reliance on like hard coding everything. So sometimes there'd be like a little bit of minimal code, kind of like I referenced earlier in the presentation. A lot of people just like use CSS to edit a little bit of the design, but not really coding everything from scratch, or use a little bit of JavaScript to edit a specific function, but they're not making everything by hand, which really reduced kind of the barrier to entry, as well as how much time was needed to have a website. Around the same time, we see frameworks like jQuery, and then later Angular, React, Vue.js made front-end development more efficient and more modular. And by modular, what I mean is that developers were able to create a module that they could use over and over again. And a lot of these frameworks come with a lot of easy to use modules. So you're able to have a button that you use over and over again that's styled in a consistent theme. And then you're able to apply it very easily. And it reduces the amount of time and it makes everything more consistent and more appealing. And this is also where we see kind of the emergence of more branding guidelines within website development, as well as like kind of online in general, as it becomes easier and everything can become more uniform more quickly. So, kind of following these content management systems and front end frameworks, we have the mobile revolution, which is kind of still taking place, started in the mid 2010s and kind of continued to today. This is where we see a heavy emphasis on responsive web design because most people are accessing websites on their phones now. Um, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's somewhere around 80% of all web traffic is done from mobile devices. That might be a little bit outdated because I remember my boss telling me that a few years ago. But essentially, because mobile users take up such a large amount of web traffic, there's a big need to make sure that the websites look good both on a laptop and on a phone. And it's almost more important for it to look good on a phone if 80% of the traffic is coming through those mobile devices. So here we see a big emphasis on responsive web design. Someone named Ethan coined the term of responsive web design in 2010, and this really emphasized the importance of designing websites that adapt to different screen sizes. You can view it on your iPad, it looks good. You can view it on your phone, it looks good. You can view it on a laptop, it looks good. And it really also contributes to kind of the usability because if a website doesn't look good, it's not appealing, and it's also unusable on your phone or other device. When you're on the go, you're less likely to use that website and you're not able to kind of take over those users in the market. And also, it's just it's a better overall website if you're able to use it on a variety of websites. Like for example, you might notice that some websites you access are very easy to use on mobile and very hard to use on the desktop, or vice versa. And this is because they haven't prioritized responsive web design as much or are really focused on emphasizing a certain platform. Some of this is due to specific websites and apps kind of focusing on the desktop version of their website and then having a mobile app that they're hoping to gain traffic from. One thing that comes to mind is both Facebook and Gmail have particularly clunky mobile websites. I don't like having email apps on my phone because I get too many notifications and it kind of distracts me. So I just prefer to check the notifications periodically throughout the day when I'm dedicated to responding to emails. But I noticed that the difference between the UI in a mobile app for Gmail or Outlook was much better on the mobile application versus the mobile website because they've emphasized so much in the design of their desktop website, if that makes sense. So kind of after we see the responsive website design era, we kind of move into modern web development. Oh, I messed up the slides. Oops. Okay, I think that I added a second slide it was a repeat, my bad. So we're going to move into a little bit more about the web development stack and talking more about kind of what makes up a website. So kind of the overall view of what web development as a whole is, kind of an overview, is it just like a collection of programming languages, tools like React, Angular. Sometimes you're using different libraries and plugins to make development easier. And then also frameworks that come together and work together to make a web application do everything that's needed and everything that kind of makes the process run as smoothly as possible. So there's two aspects of web development we need to focus on. The first is backend development, and this consists of tasks that typically happen behind the scenes, such as data storage, user authentication, and processing requests from the front end. Think of backend development as all the things that are going on in a website. or even an app where you're not seeing what's going on, but it's kind of what's powering it overall. And some key technologies for backend development are server-side programming languages, databases, server frameworks, APIs, and security. I also have like a lot of things to list off, but I'll go in depth into that later. And then front-end development is kind of what we'll be focusing on the most today. That's what we'll be doing our live coding demo with later. But this is what you see and interact with on a daily basis. You're able to see it directly in your web browser. And also, I really like in web development, when you're making a front end, you're able to kind of see in real time your code like take effect and take change, which I really enjoy. Some key technologies for front-end development are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some libraries where you're able to like kind of combine those or use them in a more programmatic way versus traditional kind of like vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but we're not going to focus on that today. So here's a little bit more of like a dive into backend technologies. So like I mentioned earlier, backend technologies are comprised of server-side programming languages, server frameworks, databases, APIs, and backend development. So some examples of server-side programming languages are PHP, Ruby, Python, Node.js, and Java. Some of the more common ones are Java, Node.js, and Python. PHP and Ruby aren't used as much anymore, but still can be used for the backend. Some server frameworks are Express, Laravel, Django, and Ruby on Rails. I've only personally encountered Django and Express when working on websites, but the other two are still powering websites today. And then as far as kind of databases and database management, you'll see SQL, PostgreSQL, as well as MongoDB. I've personally only worked with MySQL as well as MongoDB for databases. There are a variety of ways to manage data on websites. As far as APIs, a little bit more of a dive into that. Those are what are used for the communication between the front and back end of a website. So they're kind of connecting all of those functions to like the buttons that will execute them. So it's connecting that particular button to make sure that when you press it, that function is getting executed, that form is getting submitted, it's accessing that data. And what they do in particular is allow for data to be exchanged in a structured format. It's usually a JSON format, which is an object-oriented format. It's particular to JavaScript, and this allows for the front end to request and display information in a dynamic way. So for example, if you ever go into a website and it like displays hello name, so in my case it would say hello Gabriella, that's kind of like what's being used as an API to display that information. And then also backend development typically includes implementing security measures, and this is for a lot of reasons, as you can imagine. People get hacked all the time, whether that be an individual or a website. So it's very important to make sure your security is in order. Backend development typically includes like making sure that authentication is there to make sure that no one's gaining access to someone's account who shouldn't have it, as well as preventing like those common web vulnerabilities such as phishing or just common things that can be exploited on a website. Okay, it looks like there's a few questions. Someone says how to choose between a MERN stack or a mean stack development. I think it just depends like on like what you're looking for. I've typically, every time I've chosen to make a like website or web page, I will use a MERN stack just because I like using React a little bit more. It's like more modern and I like the design of it more. But when I've worked in corporate environments where the code is a little bit more outdated and there's more of a larger code base to kind of work with, I'll be using Angular just because like that's what is standard at the place. Okay. Someone asked if I can share the PowerPoint. I'll be sharing that at the end and the Discord, so don't worry about if you miss a particular thing. Okay, so now it's time to code. One thing I'm going to have everyone do before we get started is get onto Replit. It's a browser-based IDE, so you're able to access the code there. I will share a link to that in the chat. So you'll just need to make an account. You can sign in with Google, Microsoft, or a variety of other common accounts. And I will walk you through how to make a new Replit, and we can get started coding. I'm going to give you a few minutes to set up your account or log in. And then once we have that, we'll be back to coding. Yes. So make sure to sign up for an account, and I'll be back in about a minute to get everyone started with the website. Okay, I hope everyone was able to get a Replit account or sign in. And if not, send a message in the chat and I can help you out. And now I have some more water as well. Give me 1 second. It seems to have logged me out of Replit, and then we can get started. Okay, it's doing dual factor authentication. Okay, I think we're all approved. Okay, awesome. It looks like we have Replits, which is awesome. I'm going to change the screen I'm sharing so that we can get started coding. Okay, so if you were able to create your Replit, you should be seeing a screen like this. So what you're going to do is click on Create Replit, and then you're going to select one of the templates as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can change the title if you want, but otherwise it'll just generate a title for you, which I find to be particularly helpful because I don't have to think about it if I don't need to. And then you should be seeing something like this after you do that. If you have any issues with that, send a message in the chat. I'm going to give you 1 minute to kind of get that set up. But in the meantime, for those of you that were able to create a Replit, you're going to click this button right here in the top right corner on the second panel, and this is going to open up a new tab. So you'll be able to see your code in real time. I think because I'm just sharing my screen, like my one tab, you're not able to see that. So I will show that to you as well. It should be pretty blank right now, but it will just have something like Hello World as well as this Made with Replit button. And that's how you know you have it popped up on the side. Awesome. So the next thing you're going to do once we get that set up is go back to your page right here with the index.html file, and we're going to start by deleting some things. I don't necessarily want the little replit badge in the corner, so I'm going to start off by deleting that, and then deleting this hello world statement right here. And as far as what we'll be building today, it is a kind of resume, like bullet point generator website. It's a silly project I built a little while ago. And I'll walk you through that right now, and then we can get started coding. I think I put that over in a different tab, so I will have that in just 1 second for you. Okay. So this is what we will be building today. It's a pretty simple web page, but it uses a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When you click this button, based on a list of a bunch of random words, it will auto-generate a silly resume bullet point for you. Sometimes they make sense, but other times it'll be something silly like maximized office inaugural Photoshop. So a bunch of nonsense. The next one, forecasted independent average React. But as you can see, all of these words are words that are typically used on resumes, but not in the same sentence. So that's what we'll be building. If you can follow along. Oh, I just realized my screen was not sharing. My bad. This is what it looks like. And when you click the button, it changes right here. I'm going to change my screen share one last time, just so I can show everything real quick. Okay, so here you can see the replit right here, and we're going to get started coding. No, my bad. I think we're having screen sharing difficulties, but okay, we're back. My bad. We're going to get started coding, and you'll be able to see everything right here. So the first thing we're going to do is also delete this comment and then change the title right here. The title changes the text on the tab in your browser. So right now it's going to say replit, and I want to change it to say resume speak, which is the name of this silly little application I created. And if you refresh, you'll see that the hello world text that was initially there is now gone, as well as the title is disappeared. And if you want to see a little preview in the browser right next to you, you can click refresh here. But if you want to see the entire thing, you'll just click this pop-up button. Okay, now to get started, I'm going to start building out kind of the meat of this web page so we can get started with the JavaScript as well as the CSS. So the first thing I'm going to do is create just like a header. So we'll have an H2, which is kind of a small header. And then I'll put resume speak inside of it. And this is just the title of the application. Sometimes you'll have like a business title or your own personal name if you're making a personal website on these sorts of things, but that's how you do it. And then as you can see here, if you change it from H2 to H1, that will change the size of the text automatically, but you can do further styling with CSS. If we do H3, that will also change it. And I believe it goes all the way down to H6 or H5. Let's see which one it is. Yes, H6. But for right now, I think that H2 is a pretty good one for us. And then we're also going to have another span or another element. We're going to have this one be H1. And then below, we're going to have a button. And this button is the one you'll see on the screen where you're pressing it and you're able to see the different titles. Here, as I refresh the page, you can see there's nothing in the H1s, nothing showing up, and the button doesn't have any text in it. So there's nothing, it's pretty small button right there. So what we're going to say is just click me for simplicity's sake. Refresh again. And here we see this. The next thing we're going to do is add some information to the H1 element to make sure that we're able to change it as we click the button and make the dynamic kind of JavaScript interactivity easier. So the second thing we're going to do is inside of H1, we're going to add this span element with the ID of 1. And this is just adding kind of like an identifier for the JavaScript to be able to find this particular element, because we're going to want to change it in the future. And then we're going to, secondly, add span 2 and span 3. So the purpose of having 3 separate spans inside of the H1 and inside of the H1 element is because we want to have 3 separate words for the functionality of the site. As you saw earlier, it was something like created, interactive, I don't know, like trash or something like that. And it like automatically generates that, but it's based on a list of words. So we'll section it off into different types of words, and based on those types of words, it'll put a random one into span 1, 2, or 3, and then it'll all come together to look in a sentence. So the next thing we're going to do is move over to the JavaScript, and this is so we can get some interactivity before we start making any particular like style changes, which we can always have time for at the end. But I want to make sure that we get the interactivity in first. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy paste this giant list of words into my JavaScript file. I will be sending this out afterwards, so don't worry about accessing all of the different items. So as you can see, it's like a lot of different verbs. We have adjectives as well as nouns. And then up here, we're going to make a function to put all of these items into those spans we talked about earlier. In this function, I think what makes the most sense is get phrase. And it doesn't take anything in particular into this function. So we're going to leave the parentheses empty because each time we just want to generate a random one. And we're going to kind of be repeating a similar function for all 3 of these different types of words into the H1 element. So we're going to use this aspect of JavaScript. We're going to do document.get element by ID, and then we're going to add in our first ID, which is 1 spelled out in entirety. Oh, copy the wrong thing. And this is just essentially grabbing the element by ID. 1, it's selecting that in this function. And the next thing we want to do is access kind of where we put the text. So we're able to change it into one of our words that we're going to select randomly. And then we're going to do that by saying inner text. And what we want to do next is we want to change it to one of our random verbs, because that's what we want our first word to be. So we're going to set that equal to verbs. But since verbs is an array, we have to access a specific one, but we don't want it to be accessing the same verb each time because we want it to be randomized. So how we're going to randomize that is by a quick function using a built-in JavaScript function called math. And this allows us to do a lot of different functions very quickly without building it out from scratch in JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do is math dot random. And inside of next to math.random, we're going to have it being multiplied by the length of verbs. And we do that by verbs.length. So this essentially is generating a random number, but we're making sure that it is generating a random number that is within the length of verbs so that it's accessing the particular index in the array. Because the normal math.random function doesn't go that far. I believe it's like it's from 0 to 1 or something like that. So this is just kind of extending that random function. And then finally, what we're going to do in front is do math.round. And this is rounding the number so that the item is a whole number and is able to access one of the indices within the array more easily than if we had like 1.3, it would confuse the accessing in the array. So this should give us a whole number, and we should be able to access one of our verbs right here. So to kind of test this out, I'm going to refresh the page, and then let's see if it works. It's not connecting, so let's see what's up. Okay, we have the IDs. Everything is connected. What might be going on is the script is not above the items. Sometimes that makes a difference in things like Replit. Oh, I see what we're doing. I forgot one very crucial part in my excitement to test the code. There's no onClick function that's calling it when we click the button. So right here, I'm going to add to the button element the onClick feature. What this essentially does, it's adding a feature to the element button, and it's making sure that every time we click that button, it's calling the function we need to change those words. So we're going to do get phrase. And because get phrase is not taking anything into it, we just need to have those open parentheses. And we'll do a semicolon as well to make sure we cross all our I's, or cross all our T's, dot all our I's. Refresh the page one more time, and it looks like it's working. So as you can see, it says exceeded now. So we have our first item showing up within the span. I'm going to come back to the stream and make sure there aren't any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can walk you through them. So someone asked what span does. Oh, and then we had another viewer respond that span is for grouping elements. Yes, so you can group different elements. It's similar to div, but like another watcher said, but div is a block element, whereas span is more inline. That's correct. I just use them to kind of have a simple way to segment the different words. And here, you could probably do it with like a lot of different segmentation tools, or even another H1 or different text element inside. I just thought it would be easier to kind of keep track of everything with the IDs. So now that we have this first word is functioning properly, we're going to do it with the second two. So now we're currently getting a verb, and as you can see, if you click it, it generates a bunch of different words that are in this array. And I think I just got these from like some career fair, like PDF, where they had like, I don't know, strong words to use in your resume or something like that. So the next thing we need to work on is adjectives. we're going to follow almost the exact same process for changing this, but we're going to do it to element ID too. So we're going to do document get element by ID, and then we're going to do element 2, and then element 2 is for adjectives, and we're also going to access the inner text again, and we're going to change that what we had last time, except instead of accessing the verbs array, we're going to be accessing the adjectives array. And since I don't remember if I had all of the lengths be the same, we'll also change this right here so it has adjectives.length as well to make sure that we're accessing the entirety of the adjectives array versus just the verbs array. And next, I'm going to refresh this page, and then I'm going to click this. And as you can see, it's displaying both of these words, but they're kind of all jumbled together. And that's a pretty quick fix. So here, we're just going to need to add more space in between the spans. So as you can see, there's a little bit of space in between the opening tag for the span element, but not in between span elements themselves. I'll add a few spaces right here. And then I will add one in between span 1 or span 2 and 3 as well. And then I'm going to refresh the page. And here we see it looks normal again. Are there any questions so far? Okay, if not, I'll keep going along, but make sure to drop them in the chat if you have any questions. So finally, what we're going to need to do to access these different, or to display the last word is we're going to add a noun at the end. So we'll do document dot get element by ID again. But this last time, we're going to be accessing the third element. And then we're going to change the inner text to the same thing. Sorry if you heard that loud beeping in the background. I think that was my laundry machine. And for this last one, we'll do nouns. It's the same logic for all three of them. It's just accessing different items. And we could probably make a function that's a little bit more efficient here. But for simplicity's sake, since we're just showing everyone how to do some basic JavaScript, we'll just repeat it for the sake of kind of repetitive learning. So here, we'll click this button and all three are showing up. If you click again, it randomly shows up. It's just kind of like chance that engineered showed up twice. As you can see now, it's produced best app, analyzed administrative system, utilized readable Photoshop, and kind of the bones of the app are working. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make it look pretty, because right now it looks pretty blank with just the title and those words. It's all kind of the default settings. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a website called HTML Color Codes to pick out some colors for my website. So next thing I'm going to do is show you this screen. So this is where I pick out all my colors when I'm designing a website. You're able to access them in RGB, HSL, as well as hex. I typically use hex when I'm designing websites, but you're able to access every color under the sun. And also, if you know a particular color, you're able to like find that and download color schemes. And they also have a pretty cool color picker feature where you're able to find analogous colors, complementary. And I find this to be really nice for designing websites because you're able to find simple color schemes relatively quickly. Does anyone have any suggestions for what they think the background of my website should be? I again realized I wasn't sharing my screen. My bad. I typically do a blue just because I like blues. I think I'm going to do a lighter blue, but not like neon. So something kind of like this. going to copy that. Okay, someone wants teal. Someone else asked, what's the website I'm using for colors? It's called HTML Color Codes, and I will send that in chat after I copy over my hex code real quick. I'm sharing the color picker feature right now. And this is where you're able to kind of make those different color palettes relatively easy. There's also the tones feature where you're able to kind of create color tones together. Okay, and now we're going to switch back over to the codes page on Replit. So what we're going to do now is all on the styles.css page. And this is the stylization of the entire page. The Replit comes with some default features. It's not much. It's just essentially making sure that the web page is taking up the entire height and width of the page. And what I want to do is change the background color from white to this nice bluish teal color. So how you do hex codes is you have background dash color colon, and then you have a number sign or hashtag. You copy the hex code, and then you have a semicolon. And once you refresh the page, it should look like this. And then kind of secondly, what I want to do is change the font of the web page. And then I'm going to do that by going to Google Fonts, which is another cool website where you're able to import web fonts very quickly from a variety of different sources. So here is the Google Fonts page right here. And I'm going to be selecting, I think just Open Sans. It's a pretty quick way to access the different fonts. And when you're selecting the different web pages, or when you're selecting the different fonts, sorry, you're able to select different boldness, italicized. So in the case of this, I'm just going to be selecting a few different fonts. I just want to have regular as well as kind of a bolder one for the title. And there's a few different ways to embed it. So what I'm going to do is the CSS way, where you do @import, and then I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to add it back to my particular web page. So as you can see here, you're able to select the different fonts. You can just have the regular if you want, and that will change right here what the import is. And you can also do the semi-bold as well. If you wanted to import multiple fonts at a time, that's something else you can also do. So if I wanted to do this one as well, but just in this very thin font, I could do that and have them all be imported here, but I don't really want that. So I'm going to remove that before I copy this import statement and bring it back to my code. Okay, so here in the CSS page above all of my declarations, I'm going to have this import statement. The next thing I'm going to do is bring over the CSS rule. On that same Google font page we were just at, you're able to copy over this rule with the font family. So this is declaring the font family for this particular one for the entire page. And if you refresh, you can see that that has been changed for everything on the page. I'm not going to add this specific weight for the fonts until a little bit later, because I want to make sure that it's specific to the different items. So here I'm going to have the H2 element have a font weight of, let's see what I copied over. I had 400 and 600. So H2 is going to have a font weight of 400. And then H1 is going to have a font weight of 600. And the reason I have the H2 after the H1, I know a few of you are asking, is just because I want the main focus to be on these like silly terms versus the title. I want this to kind of fade into the background, but still be noticeable. And as you can see, the middle one is bolder when I do a font weight of 600 versus a font weight of 400. Next thing I want to do is edit what the button looks like. And we're able to do that also in the style page. And you declare that by doing button with these columns as well. And you can change a lot about it pretty quickly. I think I want the background color of this particular button to maybe be just a simple black. That's another thing you can do when declaring design rules on and CSS is you can just do a simple color. It's typically not the most aesthetically pleasing if you're not just choosing white or black. So for example, if I wanted to choose yellow and choose the default color, it's a very bright kind of blinding yellow. I don't think it goes well with this color scheme. I don't typically use this yellow. There's also blue, which is a kind of darker, brighter blue. But I do want the background to be black, so we're going to bring it back to the black color. The next thing I want to do is change the font color, because since I changed the background color to black, you can't really see the text anymore. And we'll do that by saying color white. And color is the CSS rule that changes the text color of different items. So now you can see it says click me again, and you're able to fully execute this web page. The next thing I want to do is kind of change the shape of this. I want to change the shape of this button so it's a little bit bigger and not as boxy. So the first thing I want to do is change the border radius so it's not a square anymore. And I'll do that by doing border radius 1 rem. And as you can see, that kind of rounded off the edges. So it's now more of a pill shape than a square. And what I want to do is expand the button so it's not so tiny. And I can do that by saying padding 0.5, or maybe let's try 0.7 rem. We'll refresh this, and you can see it's bigger. What the padding essentially does, this rule declares that there's more space in between the edge of the button and the text itself. I do think I want the font size to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to have it be 1.25 rem. And what rem stands for essentially is the default font size for any given web page. It's usually around a 16 or 18, but it does vary by your web page and kind of what you chose to do. So now it's looking a little bit better. I think I want to add one more change though. I don't quite like the original border on this. I think it would look better if it was just the kind of rounded off button. So I'm going to take the border and set that to 0 so that this web page, there's no border on the button. As you can see, it's now been removed and it's a pretty sleek, clean button. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is add some emojis, just because I like adding a little bit more spice to web pages. I think a particularly nice one could be this computer. And then I will have a briefcase because it's a resume. And then you'll rerun. It adds some emojis to this. Maybe I'll do it to the button as well. Add some sparkles and finger. Let's do a little pointing finger. Okay. So here we have this, and it's more set up, but there's one last thing I do want to change. Since there's not that much on this web page, I want to center it so it's at the very center, and this will help with the responsive kind of web design. So you're able to view it on your phone a lot easier. and you can move it from your iPad to your cell phone to a desktop a lot easier. So I'll do this by going to HTML, and I'll change the text align feature to center. And this will essentially just center everything on the page, which very easily changes where everything is. And as you can see, everything's in the center. The last thing I want to do is kind of expand the size of everything. Excuse me. So you're able to see everything a little bit better, even on a desktop, it's a little bit small. So I'll do that by going to our different items and changing the font size. And here we'll have maybe 2 rem, and then for H1 we'll have font size 3 rem. Let's see what that looks like. Refresh the page. Okay. That looks pretty good. I kind of think that the second panel on this website when we're coding on Replit mimics the size of an iPhone or another mobile device pretty easily. Maybe it's a little bit smaller on an iPhone, but as you can see, it resizes and is pretty responsive to those different things. So I think we have that pretty good. I'm going to check back for any questions now. Okay, we have a comment talking about the H2 versus H1. You can change that with font width though. It'll mess up a screen reader and the website's SEO if you use 2 before 1. Okay. I did not know that the changing the order of the header elements mess with screen readers. I definitely don't want to have that. So I'm going to go back and change the order so it works a little bit better. I don't care much about the SEO for a kind of a silly website like this, but I want to make sure that the websites I do make are accessible. So let's go back and change the order so that everything would work a little bit better with the screen reader. So first thing we're going to do is change the H1 and H2 elements, and then we'll go back and change the styling. So as you refresh, you kind of see the order got swapped because the CSS rules still apply. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the font weight and font size. Just going to do a little switcheroo here with the H1 and H2 elements. And then I'll also put H1 before H2, just so there's the reminder that the H1 rules apply to the first element now versus the second one. And then I will delete these old rules from the H2 element. We'll do a little refresh. And it looks like everything is back to normal. But hopefully there shouldn't be any issues with screen readers now. The one thing I might do though is with if I can reload this page. There we go. I think I want to make the font size on H1 a little bit bigger. Maybe a 2.25. And then it's loading. I don't have as good of CPU once I add more things onto Replit. And then I'm going to reduce the font size to maybe a 2.75 for H2. Because the next thing I want to do, since we have a good amount of extra time in this stream, is to add another adjective so that the phrases are a little bit more fun. So there's a few different ways we could do this. We could add another span and just kind of copy the original logic that we have for these particular ones. So the way we would do that is by just adding, let's see, span ID with 2.5. And then we'll close that span. And then we can just copy over the same logic from this, and we change the ID to 2.5. And this is essentially just meaning 2.5. Looks like I did not properly close a span here. I think the autocomplete with Replit was messing with me for a little bit. So here we have avoided future cross-functional UI. And as you can see, I forgot this space between spans again. So we're going to fix that. Space, space. Refresh the page again. And here we have expedited best cross-functional JIRA, which is a little silly. But another thing I want to maybe try is seeing if we can generate two adjectives in the same kind of statement versus having just the same logic repeat for the third time. So what I'm going to have is just this being repeated in the same line, and let's see if it avoids kind of having the same adjective twice. Accomplished mobile daily processes. So it doesn't have the same adjective. I think it's just by chance since I don't have any handling features, but it does kind of combine because it's the same variable. So I'm going to add in that function an empty string of text in between these two. So I have the original line of code that's accessing the adjective array. And then I have plus this empty string of text, which serves as a space, and then plus generate another adjective essentially. Refresh and then run, and now it looks nice. I do think what I want to do next is kind of make sure that we don't have the same adjective twice. So we don't have it saying best twice, because although I want this to be silly, I don't want it to be that redundant or that, I guess, like I want it to be funny, not just nonsensical. So what I'm going to do is have just a placeholder variable, and that's where I'm going to be generating this original adjectives. Oh no. Okay. I fear it's not copying as easy as I wanted to. And then at the very beginning of this function, I'm going to set placeholder just equal to an empty string so that it resets every time the function is run. So here, I'm going to have it create a random adjective, and then we'll have placeholder 2. And then we'll generate another adjective. And here I'm going to have a quick if statement. So we'll have if placeholder is not equal to placeholder 2. Within that, we're just going to have the inner text of this element be equal to placeholder plus empty string plus placeholder 2. And then else, I'm just going to have it rerun. So we'll just redo this. This code is getting a little bit messy though, so I am going to optimize it in just a second. So it continues to not do this, but there is a use case where this is going to stop essentially working as if, for example, it runs through, it finds that placeholder is equal to placeholder 2. So then it goes automatically to the else statement, and it's going to run this. But if it's, again, equal to placeholder 2, it's just going to print it out. And I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to change this from an if statement to a loop. So while placeholder is equal to placeholder 2, I'm going to have it generate this new item. So kind of replacing the need for that if statement. And then once it escapes that loop, if it even needs to go in that loop in the beginning, it will add the items to this particular element. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the quick if statement and for loop or the while loop I added? So essentially, the if statement is a quick way in JavaScript to check if a case is true, if two items equal each other, if maybe a variable is equal to 4, et cetera, et cetera. Then you can execute another function, and otherwise you can do something else. And the while loop is essentially checking a certain condition, and while that condition is true, it will continue to execute this particular function. So while not the most efficient way to solve this problem, I think it works for a silly website. It's while these placeholders are equal to one another, it's going to continue to generate a random adjective until they are no longer equal to each other. And then after that is done and they are no longer equal to each other, it's going to come down here. We're going to add it to this statement on the page. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions about JavaScript. I know I kind of sped through parts of that as I was debugging it in live time, but hopefully I was able to talk through that in a way that made sense to anyone who was completely new to JavaScript or web development in general. Oh, it looks like someone shared a cool article about the heading levels with different screen readers. So that's good to know. I'll definitely be sure to read that after the stream is over. And someone was, I guess, was reading with me, never look into the front end code. I'm making hackathons. I also agree that sometimes when you're at a hackathon and everything's pretty crammed, the code can get a little bit messy and not too optimized. And we'll need some changes to make sure it's compatible with screen readers and other accessibility tools. But it's kind of like the point of a hackathon is to kind of messily bring together code. So it's okay if it's not perfect that particular weekend. If my margins and padding seem to have bugs, I sometimes just use line breaks for spaces and go on. I've also done that in the past, especially like when I'm bringing together a website really quickly for, I don't know, like random things like this is kind of a joke website, or for clubs, I've made like games very quickly. I'm currently making a Jeopardy game for one of my clubs, and I was getting a little frustrated with the spacing, so I just added breaks as well. So definitely have done that as well. Awesome. Okay. It looks like we don't have any other questions. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. 404 and I are bonded in our heinous web development crimes. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to dive back into the presentation. I have a few more resources to go over, so you can kind of continue learning about web development and some other resources, because I know today was kind of a silly project and just a few features. But we can dive into a little bit more expansive courses, how I learned about web development, and the like. Someone wants me to send the link to the updated replit. I will do that. So they seem to have moved the share button since last time. I'm going to do... Okay, here is the join link. So anyone can... Oh, I'm going to just do this. Don't want to give edit access to everyone. I'm just going to do this link right here. So you're able to access the replit and all the code I wrote during this stream. And then I will send out the slides in the Discord after the stream's over. But moving back into the stream or into the slides, I'm going to talk more about resources for further web development learning. Okay, moving back over here. So here's what we made. I think we used different emojis and a different font this time, but it's the same general idea. But here's a little bit more on learning even more about web development and kind of how I learned. Most of like where I learned web development and kind of like the more expensive parts with like heavier JavaScript, getting more into frameworks like Angular and databases was through LaunchCode. I actually went through their boot camp when I was in high school. It's a really cool program. They do like a lot of stuff for like career switchers and kind of apprenticeship stuff as well at the end of the program. But they also have some really good open source curriculum, which I have linked in here, where you can learn all about web development. They have, I think, some data science stuff, as well as like how to make portfolios. It's great resources. And then I also have here a link to W3 schools, which is some great reference material. If you're ever wondering what a very specific title in CSS does, you're going to go to W3 schools. A lot of times when you Google, I guess like border radius or some other like niche rule, you'll get a W3 schools link to pop up. I really like their websites because you're able to edit their sample code on the website in their browser. So I'm able to kind of make minor changes and see like what it would look like before I implement it into my own code, and also read a little bit more about what the different rules do. I also really like Mozilla's documentation on different web stuff as well, because it gives you more of a breakdown. So if you're learning a specific new rule or feature, it's a great place to kind of do a deep dive in that. But like 404 says, W3 is the go-to when you forget a syntax or a keyword, or you're trying to like solve some specific problem on your website. I use it all the time at hackathons and other school projects. And then finally, we have Free Code Camp. They have a ton of material on a bunch of different topics, but I really do like their web design curriculum. I didn't learn the basics of web development on there, but I did go through some of their front-end development libraries course, the second one. It walks you through React and kind of the more advanced web development stuff. So that's why I really enjoy their stuff. And they also have kind of challenges and projects at the end of all their lessons to make sure that you're really understanding the material. And I think you can earn like a certificate or something at the end. But it's been like a year or two since I've gone through one of those courses myself. So I have the links to all of this on here. And there's a bunch of other resources where you can learn web development. I really recommend going to hackathons to learn about more about web development and kind of start building your own websites. That's where I gained the most experience, even though I did do some education through places like LaunchCode or like a class or two. I really feel like you gain the most experience when you're doing stuff hands-on. If there aren't any questions, I can go through and kind of show you some of the websites I've built at hackathons and hackathon-like environments, just to kind of show you like the kind of stuff you can build in a weekend. Someone else is sharing in my love for hackathons. Hackathons and global hack weeks with MLH are the best for learning and creating community. Yes, I totally agree. I love doing global hack week and getting to learn a bunch of new stuff from my peers, MLH, as well as getting to go to hackathons. I've organized hackathons. I've gone to hackathons as a hacker, and now I go to hackathons as a coach. It's an absolute blast. Okay, so now I'm going to go into a few websites that I've built, and I've seen some other cool websites people built at hackathons. Kind of show you like what you can build. It's a really helpful tool, I think, too, if you're trying to build out a portfolio. So I'm going to stop sharing and share my screen to something else. This is something that I saw someone else build. It's called MI Tier, where you're tier ranking different classes at MIT. I don't go to MIT, but this person does, and you're able to kind of search the classes you're taking in a course or maybe over your entire time and kind of rank them in the tier ranking system, which I thought was pretty fun. So if you're like looking for, I don't know, sustainable tech, it adds it and you're able to tier rank it. I implemented a version of this with my own university. I like scraped everything from the course website with JavaScript and put it up on a web page, but it got unhosted in the time between when I made it and now, so I was not able to show it. So here's like a version of that. And then here is, oh, I don't think I was sharing my screen then. I'm so sorry. Here we go. So here is the tier ranking website. you're able to kind of put them in different tiers and then also search. So like, I don't know, media as one, and put it into different ones, which is pretty cool. And then the next one I'm going to do is this kind of like climate timeline I did for a bunch of different climate change events. If it will show up. Okay, here it is. Share. Okay, so we just took a bunch of different climate change and like climate justice related events and kind of like wrote a little bit about them, put them on this cool timeline and how to rotate with CSS. Yeah, I think it's pretty fun to build out these websites, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you to everyone so much for popping out to this web development stream. I'll share the slides in the Discord afterwards, but thank you to everyone so much for coming out.